Well, I missed being able to worship together. We're so glad that we could gather here for just that reason. We've been studying through the book of Mark together. And so a week before last, we ended with this story that, Jesus was asked several questions. And they were why questions. The last one was, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? And we talked, and it's kind of interesting, they had a whole different category of, what's worse than a sinner? Well, it's a tax collector, right? And Jesus makes this, for the first time, he really reveals why he's here. He just says, well, it's not the healthy that need a doctor, it's the sick. And I've come not to save the righteous, but the sinners. And so it would make sense that we find Jesus with sinners, right? And we're gonna go through some more line of questioning that each of these stories reveal as we continue through Mark chapter 2 today. And as we do that, I want us to remember that a lot of the line of questioning in which Jesus is asked is driven out of traditions, okay? And it wasn't tradition to eat with people. It was tradition when you ate with somebody that you were saying, I agree with you, I align with you. We're in unison, we're friends, and so the tradition was that you would only eat with people that you align with, right? And so I would just encourage you, if you're not, you need to eat with sinners, okay? People who are different than you, people who don't know who Jesus is yet. That's the way they get to know Jesus. And so as we think about this idea that Jesus is questioned many times out of tradition. So we think, we think about all the traditions we have here at SEC. We have layers of them, all right, whether you realize it or not. And the longer that you're here, the more you realize that. What would November be like without the fall festival, right? And some of you are like, what's the fall festival? I was like, wait till November, you'll find out, right? And we have many others. And traditions are great, aren't they? They can be. They can be great until they get to the point where, people will ask good questions. Won't they? And it's like, why do we do that way? And someone will say, usually that's been entrenched at that place for a long time. It's just, I don't know, it's always the way we've just done it that way, right? Someone decided that the fall festival would be great right before Thanksgiving, and that's the way it fell, right? And so there, as Jesus comes on the scene here. Remember I told you he enters and he's like looking around and he's like, wow, this whole religion thing has become very complicated. Meaning that it's entrenched in traditions, that traditions aren't always bad, but when traditions start to become something of some biblical substance or stance where we begin to think of it like, well, we got to do it that way because the Bible says to do it that way. Well, not necessarily. The Bible doesn't say to do it that way, right? Sometimes we have layers of human traditions that were, at one point when they started, were meant to help guide us closer to God, okay? And it's important, so there's lots and lots of commentaries. If you've ever, looked up a Bible verse in a commentary, it's somebody else's, interpretation or spin or thought on that Bible verse, right? And hopefully they're a little bit smarter than us, right? And they write about that, and it helps us understand it and intake it and live that out in a way that makes sense, right? And so there were what you would call commentaries written on the Old Testament, and these commentaries were started, centuries ago by rabbis who meant really well. And a lot of these things, the Bible at the time, right, then was the Old Testament, right? Remember this word Mishnah. Mishnah is one of them, okay? It's a book of a collection of rabbis' thoughts on how to actually live out the Old Testament. Some of these things are really great. And we're going to learn that when these things become, to the point where, hang on a second, these things are actually keeping me from really experiencing God, then that's when the tradition or the commentary is way off base, right? And so that we know there was a group of people that were policing the nation, the Jewish nation, the Pharisees, right? And they were living these rules out because they really felt that Chronicles was if they could keep from sinning and they could keep the nation from sinning, then what was written in Chronicles would come true, right? If my people who are called by my name will turn from their evil ways, then I will come and heal their land. And some of them thought, if we could just do this for 24 hours as a nation, God might come back and restore us, right? And that's a great thought, but it wasn't ever the plan, okay? And so as we go through and we look and we read this next section, I want us to understand that some of the line of questioning is out of tradition, okay? That really kind of overshadowed, or overstated the real meaning of what Jesus came to do. And Jesus came to set things very clear and very straight. And so it says, now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. Some of them came and asked Jesus, how is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not? Okay? This is interesting because there's two different groups of people who have the same question. Okay? There's John's disciples. This is John the Baptist's disciples. They're coming. They watch Jesus' disciples, and they watch how Jesus leads his disciples. Now, a disciple is what we want you to be. You know that? That's the mission. One of the missions of our church is for you to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. It just simply means that you are a student of Jesus. You want to become exactly like Jesus. That's what we want. And we set out our life when we accept Christ. It doesn't end there when we accept Christ. It starts. And we go through this journey of following Jesus through our whole life. And so these guys are doing this. Jesus wasn't the inventor of disciples, by the way. He just came in and exploited the whole system and used it, as well as these other rabbis, these other leaders. So it's interesting. You have John the Baptist, you have his disciples, and they're asking the same question. So John the Baptist's disciples probably would have been there and watched Jesus be baptized. I mean, could you imagine? They're like, whoa. And John's message all along was like, I got to become smaller so he can become bigger. I'm making the way for the one to come. And when he sees him, oh, behold the Lamb of God, the one whom I'm not worthy of unstrapping his sandals, right? They were very pro-Jesus. They were on board. You could say they were on the same team because they were. Now it's interesting because the other group, the Pharisees, these disciples, well, they were not. Matter of fact, the Pharisees were very concerned about Jesus, and the disciples were to follow that same line of thinking. But we have these two different groups that come together and ask the same question. They watch Jesus. They go, we've noticed that you guys don't fast. You're not fasting like the rest of us. And they were probably at the time going through a fast. But ever fasted? Yeah. Fasting is just a time in which we biblical fasting is we abstain from food. Okay, the very thing that keeps us alive, so we can concentrate on, really be reminded on what actually keeps us alive, right? What actually sustains us. It's this idea that I'm gonna use all of this focus that I have on food, and I'm gonna turn it towards God here, and I'm just gonna concentrate on this. I want to be drawn deeper, soul, mind, spirit, physically, in every way to you. Okay. Now, food isn't the only thing that you can fast from, right? But it makes sense, right? When you've ever done it before, you're like, oh boy, the first thing that happens to me is I get a little angry, like because I'm hungry. It's like people are like, what's wrong with him? Oh, he's fasting. Stay away from him, right? Or my breath starts to go bad, right? When your body starts to break down complex cells in your body, when it moves to break down fat, which it doesn't stay there very long. It only breaks down fat for a very short amount of time, unfortunately, right? And then it moves to breaking down muscle mass. These are very complex for the body to break down. It actually changes the smell of our breath. And Jesus talks about this. He said, if you're going to fast, if you're going to do it in a way that nobody knows. He said, do it so, put some mint in your mouth, wash your face, look good, so people don't know. You're wondering, oh, he's fasting. Because people were fasting, and what they wanted to do is look at me. I'm super spiritual. I'm dialed in with God. Check me out. And Jesus warns about this. He said, if you're going to do that, if you're going to fast, make it so because the whole thing is between you and God, right? You ever met somebody who really, really wants you to know how spiritual, the elite they are? Aren't they a ton of fun to be around? No, they're not, are they? They're not. It's oh, great, yeah. Check me out. I'm pulling my own string, Yeah. And so Jesus talks about this. He even says, when you pray, go do it. Don't pray out in public like everybody else does. So drawing attention to yourself. Go into the closet and pray. And so there's lots spinning out of here. Lots goes into this idea of fasting. What you need to know is it's really never commanded, right? No, so it was kind of a voluntary thing that disciples, but Jesus says, if you do it, you will be blessed. And do it right. Now, is food the only thing you can fast from? Absolutely not, right? Amy and I, a few years ago, we fasted from sugar. That was miserable, right? It was man, let's just do without food. Might as well just do without food, right? Yeah, it's miserable. Maybe for you it's Netflix or a sport. Maybe it's golf for you. Or shopping. I picked those two things because I hate those two things, right? I'd be glad to fast from those things. But maybe for you it's for me, I read a book at the beginning of the year and it changed my life. Really, the way I think about small habits. Some of you have read the book Atomic Habits. Maybe you might have read the book. Okay. It's a horrible name for a book, I think, but just the idea is that small decisions, right, lead to big things. And I read this book, and it's kind of like Atomic Habits, but from a Christian perspective. It's called The Common Rule, and it just a handful of things it says that you can do that should be a rhythm in your life that are small things that will lead to big spiritual things, big moves towards God in your life. And one of them was I turn off my phone. I try to turn my phone off every day for an hour. And some of you that's no big deal. Well, it is for me. My whole job is surrounded by the phone. People die and they call me, those sorts of things, okay? And sometimes I'll even turn it off all night. And they go oh, I do that all the time. I don't. I'm waiting for the phone call from you guys, right? So there were other small things 3 times a day, I intentionally try to do a posture of prayer. So I just don't pray, but I will turn off my phone and I will actually go somewhere where I feel the presence of God and I will kneel down and pray. These little things have changed my life. Now, does it make me any more spiritual than anybody else? Well, no. No, but what it does do is it puts my body, my mind, and my spirit in a proper perspective. And fasting will do that for us. And so this question which is asked to Jesus, and these Pharisees that and the disciples, this is how Jesus answers this. He answered, how can the guest of the bridegroom fast when they are with them? When he is with them. They cannot, so long as he is with them. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and on that day they will fast. Jesus is saying here, listen, if the idea of fasting is to get closer to God, he answers these guys with this idea. It's they would all know that. It's yes, fasting is to help us get closer with God. It's if God is right next to you, which he is, my disciples cannot get any closer to God than they are right now. Jesus is making this clear statement, right? He is God. He is with his disciples. And there's no reason to fast because you can't get any closer to God than you are right now. Okay? And he goes on. He goes on to elaborate on this. No one sews a patch on an unshrunk cloth or old garment. Otherwise, the new piece will pull away from the old, making the tear worse. And then he goes on. No one pours new wine into an old wineskin. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the skins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins. Jesus is making this bold, clear statement here. To us, it's a little kind of, what are they talking about? We concentrate on those two words that are opposite each other, old and new. Old and new. Jesus is coming. He said, I'm coming. I'm not going to put a Band-Aid on stuff. I'm not going to put a patch on something. I've come to do something totally different than that. So when you think about old, you think about the Old Testament, right? That's what he's elaborating about, right? You think about all that goes along with that, all that God had set up for us to do in order to connect with God. A lot there, right? Thank goodness. But he says this. He says, all the old points to the new, and it does. All the Old Testament leads to the new. He said, I've come to do something totally new, a whole new covenant, a whole new promise. This was in the New Testament, right? And so we see Jesus spelling that out here. We see him just saying, okay, this is why I'm here. I have come to do this. I'm not going to do away with the law. I'm going to fulfill it. And like it says, I am creating something totally new. And it says, so we go on, it says one Sabbath. So the next thing we're going to talk about, it's not a tradition, it's a command. All right. It's in the 10 Commandments. All right. But check out how muddled things get. One Sabbath, Jesus was going along through the grain fields, and his disciples walked along and they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to them, look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? So let's think about the Sabbath for a second, right? So you have this day that's set apart to be holy. It's the fourth of the 10 Commandments, right? So remember, they didn't get the 10 Commandments until they came out of Egypt, right? They got those through Moses. God gave the 10 Commandments to Moses. Moses sits everybody down. Let's talk about this. We need to keep this day holy and set apart, unique from any other day. So, and we go back to this idea. The reason that that this is commanded is because it's the rhythm of creation. God creates 6 days. He rests the seventh. Not because God is tired. God does not get tired. He does not need to rest. But we were created to rest. It's actually built in you. And if you are living such a life where you're not resting, you don't take a Sabbath. And a Sabbath is beyond just like some lunch and watching a football game. Okay? A Sabbath is reveling and resting in who God is. Okay? And so if you're really gonna do what's commanded on the Sabbath, right? If I'm not supposed to work on the Sabbath day, then it's important to know what work is and is not, right? What's that mean? How does that look like? And so this is where these commentators, these rabbis got together. It's like, hang on, let's make this we need to draw some lines around this. What's it mean to keep it holy, set apart, pure, and so they do. They not one, but there's a whole list of things that you cannot do on the Sabbath. And none of them are found in the Bible. But they were lived out like they were found in the Bible. It's important for you to understand that. So when Jesus comes on the scene and they take this grain and they rub it in their hands, well, that's harvesting, right? So they've broken the Sabbath, and he said, how are these guys able to do what is unlawful? It's a great question. And so think just for a moment. One of the rules of the Sabbath is that, you could only walk a certain distance. Otherwise, it's considered work. Couldn't carry anything while you walked, so you had to be careful. Make sure your pockets were empty, right? You know, the only exception to some of this is if somebody was in danger of death was imminent, right? Then you could like get out of jail free card out for it, right? And so these rules on top of the rule became very heavy. It was almost so much work to try to do the Sabbath because it was a load. It was like, man, I really want to honor this, but wow, and so this brings Jesus into this. It says the Pharisees. He said he answered. This is verse 25. He answered, "Why have you never read what David did when he and the companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which was lawful only for the high priest to eat. He also gave some to his companions. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made, he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." And so it's interesting that Jesus goes right to this Old Testament story. They would have known it. That's why he went to it. And for us, it was like, why was he talking about? David is on the run here. Saul is after him. He's been out in the wilderness with his guys. They're to the point where they're starving to death. Right? They've been on the run. David swings by the tabernacle. He knows what's sitting in the table there. He knows what's happening. He swings in there. There's a table, and it has 12 loaves of bread on it. Each one represents one of the tribes of Israel. It's like this picture, like God will provide, God will provide, God will provide, God will provide. And the only people that were supposed to really glean from that, eat that, were the priests. But David comes in, he just gathers it all up, starts passing it out to his guys. And the priest comes out and is like, "What are you doing? You can't do that." And David's like, what do you want me to do? You want the next king to die of hunger when food is right here? And it's like the priest steps back a little bit and he realizes that when ceremony gets in the way, right, it can bring death. He steps back, and Jesus uses that story to kind of introduce this idea. It's like, hey, I'm the next king. Here I am. I am the one. Is the Sabbath, is it for man or is man for the Sabbath? Right? In this heavy tradition day had turned into something that was not a blessing anymore. And Jesus begins to get upset about it. He will go on in our next story to lay it out even more so. In chapter 3, there's these two stories Mark puts back to back for a reason. Jesus is making a bigger statement here. He's making it would have been jarring, the type of statement he's making here. It says, another time Jesus went to the synagogue and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. And Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everybody." The church is going on. They're watching him. This guy comes. He has him stand up in front of everybody, and Jesus asks them, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. He looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed with their stubborn hearts, and said to them, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched out his hand, and his hand was completely restored. The Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. You see, Jesus is here, and he is making a very, remember I told you when Jesus came on the scene, he was like, man, this is all this religious stuff has become very complicated. You're like, and he's not talking about the 10 Commandments, right? He's talking about all these layers of these extra rules that are just piled on things. He says, like, people can't even set and enjoy the Sabbath because they're worried about all these other rules. And the whole idea of the Sabbath was to set, and every time that you set in the presence of God, and it's just that's your agenda. Do you know that you're experiencing a little bit of heaven? Do you know that? That's the intent. Do you know what will never be practiced in heaven? This is the Sabbath. Because heaven is the Sabbath. Jesus came to make this very bold statement. He said, I've not come to put a Band-Aid or fix something. I've come to make something totally new. And Jesus said, I am the Sabbath. That's what I am. I am heaven coming down to earth. I am the Sabbath. And so I want to read to you what's recorded in Revelation 21 because the language fits so well with all the language, all the verbiage that we've heard so far in these three stories. And maybe you need to close your eyes and just take this in. It says, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first earth and the first heaven had passed away, and there was no more sea. I saw a holy city, the new Jerusalem, come down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. I heard a loud voice from the throne say, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, no more mourning, no more crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who is seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. He said, write these down. These are trustworthy words and true. A few verses down in the same chapter, it says, the city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives light, and the Lamb is the lamp. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their splendor unto it. No day will there be the gates ever shut, for there will be no night there. I think it's interesting how in the rhythm of creation, God created, he created the sun and the moon to govern the day and the night. And that will not be needed anymore. Because what will provide light will be the Lamb, which acts as the lamp for us, which is Christ. And so many of us live a rhythm of life that we were never intended to live. We live like we're still in Egypt, like we're slaves. Like there's always something to do. And for us to understand that we can set and revel in the reality of who Christ is, that he is the Sabbath. He says, all who are weary and burdened, come to me. My yoke is light. And maybe that's where you're at. Maybe you've never accepted Christ before, and you're like, what is this all about? It is about understanding that the one that has come to bring heaven to earth has come and paid all that should be paid forever and ever for our sins. Therefore making making what he said at the end very true. It is finished. It's finished. And so maybe you have a decision to make for Christ. Maybe we just need to pray together. I don't know. But let's stand and let's sing this like we are the people of the Sabbath.